Damon Carter thought he was just there to fix her internet connection, but the moment Sophia emerged from her shower in that silk robe, every wire in his body seemed to short-circuit in the most deliciously dangerous way. What started as a routine tech support call was about to become something far more complicated and infinitely more tempting. The Ethernet cable slipped from his fingers as footsteps descended the mahogany staircase behind him. He'd been crouched beside the router for 20 minutes, untangling the mess of premium networking equipment that screamed money louder than the marble floors and crystal chandelier overhead. Every piece of hardware in Sophia Whitmore's Beacon Hill townhouse cost more than most people's monthly rent, but Damon had seen enough wealthy homes to keep his focus on the blinking lights and connection diagnostics until she walked into the room. How's it going?" Sophia's voice carried that particular breathiness of someone fresh from hot water and steam. Damon looked up from the tangle of cables to find her standing in the doorway, wearing nothing but a cream silk robe that ended mid-thigh, her dark hair still damp and curling against her shoulders. His mouth went dry. "Professional boundaries," he reminded himself. "You're here to work." "Almost finished," he managed, his voice steadier than he felt. "Your mesh network was configured incorrectly. Someone set up the nodes without proper channel optimization." Sophia moved closer, and Damon caught the scent of something expensive, vanilla, and sandalwood that made him think of midnight and mistakes he wanted to make. She settled onto the leather ottoman beside him, close enough that he could see water droplets still clinging to her collarbones. "I don't understand half of what you just said, but you sound like you know what you're doing." Her smile held the kind of confidence that came from never doubting you'd be taken care of. "The last guy spent 3 hours here and made it worse." Damon forced himself to focus on the diagnostic screen, but his peripheral vision betrayed him. The robe had shifted when she sat down, revealing more of those impossibly smooth legs. He'd always prided himself on maintaining professional distance, but something about Sophia's presence made the air feel charged, electric. "There," he said, watching the final connection establish itself. "You should have full coverage throughout. The house now. Should we test it?" She leaned forward to look at his tablet, her shoulder brushing his arm. The contact sent heat racing through his chest. "I mean, to make sure everything's working properly." Damon looked into her eyes. Deep, brown with flecks of gold that caught the afternoon light, and realized he was in serious trouble. This wasn't just about internet connectivity anymore. 3 hours later, Damon was still in Sophia's home office, surrounded by the wreckage of what should have been a simple network optimization. The evening had swallowed the afternoon whole, and somewhere between configuring her smart home integration and troubleshooting her security cameras, professional distance had evaporated like morning mist. "I think your system's been fighting itself for months," he said, fingers flying across his laptop keyboard. "Every device trying to claim priority bandwidth. It's like having 12 people shouting in the same room." Sophia laughed from her position, curled in the leather reading chair, wine glass balanced on her knee. She'd changed into jeans and a cashmere sweater that made her look both more approachable and somehow more dangerous. "Sounds like my family dinners." "Big family?" Damon asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Keep it professional," he reminded himself, even as his eyes followed the graceful way she tucked her legs beneath her. Small, but loud. Sophia's smile carried an edge of something Damon couldn't quite identify. "My parents have very specific ideas about how I should live my life, what I should do, who I should marry." She took a sip of wine. Hence the escape to Boston and the need for perfect Wi-Fi to work from home. The vulnerability in her voice made something in Damon's chest tighten. He understood running from expectations, though his version involved student loans and family obligations rather than trust funds and social pressure. "What kind of work?" he asked, saving his configuration. Changes, corporate law, mergers and acquisitions. She gestured around the office with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and contemporary art. Pays for all this, anyway. Damon nodded, hyper-aware of the gulf between their worlds. His own apartment in Roxbury could fit in her office twice over. That's impressive, is it? Sophia's question held genuine curiosity. Or is it just what happens when you're too afraid to disappoint people who've invested in your success? The honesty in her voice surprised him. Most wealthy clients treated him like invisible help, barely acknowledging his presence beyond pointing at broken devices. But Sophia was looking at him like his answer mattered, like she actually wanted to know what he thought. Maybe both, Damon said carefully. Success is success, even when it's complicated. Sophia smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Spoken like someone who understands complicated. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and danger. Damon should have packed his equipment, should have left with professional boundaries intact. Instead, he found himself wanting to know more about the loneliness he heard beneath her confident exterior. "Tell me about you," Sophia said softly. "What do you do when you're not rescuing people from their technology?" Saturday morning found Damon staring at his laptop screen in his Roxbury apartment, pretending to focus on client tickets while his phone buzzed with another text from Sophia. The third one since yesterday evening, each message more casually intimate than professional protocol should allow. "Thanks again for last night. My Wi-Fi hasn't been this fast since I moved in. Coffee sometime to celebrate." Maya looked up from her textbooks scattered across their small kitchen table, dark eyes sharp with the perception that came from growing up as the smart one in a family that couldn't afford to miss details. "You're distracted," she said, highlighting another passage in her organic chemistry notes, "and you've been checking your phone every 30 seconds for the past hour." Damon closed his laptop, guilt settling in his stomach like cold coffee. Maya's textbooks cost more than he made in a week, her lab fees eating into money that should have gone toward their mother's physical therapy sessions. The Beacon Hill client paid well, but it was still just a job, one he couldn't afford to lose over personal complications. "Just work stuff," he said, but Maya's raised eyebrow called him a liar. "Work stuff that makes you smile like that?" She set down her highlighter. "Damon, you look like you've been struck by lightning." His phone buzzed again. Another message. From Sophia, this time including a photo of her coffee setup. Expensive espresso machine, gleaming in morning light, streaming through windows that probably cost more than his car. "There's this client," Damon started, then stopped. How could he explain Sophia to Maya without sounding like he'd lost his mind? That he'd spent 3 hours in a woman's home office drinking wine that cost more than their monthly groceries. Talking about dreams and disappointments like they lived in the same world. "A client who texts you pictures of coffee?" Maya's voice carried the gentle teasing of someone who'd watched her brother work himself to exhaustion for 2 years. "Sounds dangerous." "It's not like that," Damon said, but the lie felt hollow even to him. Maya closed her textbook, giving him her full attention. "You know what Mom always said about reaching for things that seem too good to be true?" Damon did know. Their mother's warnings about getting above their station, about the cost of wanting things that weren't meant for people like them. Maya was working toward a degree that would lift her out of their circumstances, but she was doing it through merit and loans, not by crossing lines with wealthy clients. His phone buzzed once more. Sophia's name on the screen, and beneath it, a simple question that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Is that a yes? The coffee shop Sophia had chosen sat 3 blocks from her townhouse, the kind of place where lattes cost $12, and every surface gleamed with artisanal intention. Damon arrived 5 minutes early, laptop bag slung over his shoulder like armor against the obvious truth that this wasn't really about network optimization. Sophia was already there, tucked into a corner booth with her own laptop open, but Damon could tell she hadn't touched the keyboard. Her fingers drummed against her coffee cup instead, and when she looked up to wave him over, her smile carried the same electric charge that had short-circuited his professionalism 2 days ago. "I ordered you a coffee," she said as he slid into the seat across from her. "Dark roast, no sugar, seemed like your style." The fact that she'd been paying attention to details like how he took his coffee sent warmth spiraling through his chest. "Thanks. So what's the follow-up issue?" Sophia's laugh was soft, conspiratorial. "Honestly, my Wi-Fi is working perfectly, but I told myself I needed a consultation about expanding coverage to my guest bedroom." Damon set down his laptop bag, hyper-aware that they'd just crossed a line neither of them could uncross. "And do you need expanded coverage?" "No." Her eyes met his, and the honesty there was both thrilling and terrifying. "I needed an excuse to see you again without calling. It's what it actually is." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had permission to build. Damon should have stood up, should have maintained the professional distance that kept his world from colliding with hers. Instead, he found himself leaning forward. "What would you call it?" Sophia's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, and Damon noticed she'd painted her nails a deep burgundy that caught the afternoon light. Interest, curiosity, the kind of attraction that makes smart people do stupid things. And, "You're a smart person. Harvard Law Review, top 5% of my class, youngest associate at my firm." Sophia's smile held self-deprecating humor. "Which is why I know exactly how stupid this is." Damon felt his resolve crumbling like sand against tide. Maya's warnings echoed in his head, along with every lesson he'd learned about staying in his lane, but Sophia was looking at him like he was worth the risk. "For the record," he said, his voice rougher than intended, "your guest bedroom gets excellent signal strength already." "Damn," Sophia said, her smile turning wicked. "Guess we'll have to find another excuse next time." The promise of next time settled between them like a secret they were both already keeping. The invitation had come disguised as another technical consultation, but when Damon arrived at Sophia's townhouse Thursday evening, the smell of garlic and wine told him exactly what kind of firewall they were about to breach. She opened the door, wearing a black dress that made his breath catch, her hair loose around her shoulders in waves that begged for his fingers. "I may have oversold the urgency of my router issues," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "But I definitely undersold my cooking abilities." The dining room glowed with candlelight, expensive wine breathing on the sideboard next to plates that probably cost more than Damon's monthly rent. He should have turned around, should have maintained the professional distance that kept his world intact. Instead, he found himself following her deeper into temptation. "This is dangerous," he said, watching her pour wine into crystal glasses that caught the flame like liquid amber. "Good dangerous or bad dangerous?" Sophia's smile carried the confidence of someone used to getting what she wanted. But underneath, Damon caught a vulnerability that made his chest tighten. The kind that changes everything. They talked through dinner about safe subjects, technology, Boston weather, her law school professors, but the real conversation happened in glances and the way her foot brushed his ankle under the table. When she laughed at his story about a client who tried to fix their computer with duct tape, the sound went straight through him like electricity. "You have an incredible laugh," he said, wine making him bolder than wisdom suggested. Sophia's eyes darkened. "Damon!" The way she said his name, soft, full of promise and warning, undid every defense he'd built. When she stood to clear the plates, he caught her wrist, felt her pulse racing under his thumb. "We shouldn't," he said, but his voice carried no conviction. "I know." She moved closer, close enough that he could see gold flecks in her brown eyes, smell the wine on her breath. "Tell me to stop." Instead, Damon stood, his chair scraping against hardwood. The space between them disappeared like morning mist, and when Sophia's lips met his, the kiss tasted like wine and reckless decisions he'd never been brave enough to make. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Damon forgot about professional boundaries, forgot about the gulf between their worlds, forgot everything except the way she felt pressed against him, like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. When they finally broke apart, breathing hard, Sophia's lipstick was smudged, and her eyes held the same stunned recognition he felt in his chest. "Now what?" she whispered. Monday morning hit like cold water. Damon sat at his desk in the cramped TechFix Solutions office, staring at service tickets while his phone buzzed with good morning texts from Sophia that made his chest warm and his stomach clench with equal intensity. 3 days since their dinner, since that kiss that had rewritten every rule he'd lived by, and reality was crashing back with the subtlety of a system failure. "Carter!" Rick Morrison's voice cut through the ambient hum of keyboards and phone calls. "My office, now!" Damon's supervisor stood in his doorway like a storm cloud, arms crossed over his company polo. Rick had hired him 2 years ago, given him the stable income that kept Maya in college and their mother in physical therapy. The man who now looked at Damon like he'd discovered malware in the company network. The office walls felt closer than usual as Rick closed the door and settled behind his desk with deliberate authority. "Beacon Hill client," Rick said, consulting a printout. "Sophia Whitmore, townhouse on Chestnut Street. You've logged 14 billable hours there in the past 10 days. Damon's mouth went dry. "Complex network setup. High-end equipment requiring optimization." "Right." Rick's tone suggested he wasn't buying it. "Marcus handled a neighbor's identical system last month. Took him 3 hours, start to finish." Heat crept up Damon's neck. Through the glass partition, he could see Marcus at his desk, pointedly, not looking in their direction. Office gossip traveled faster than fiber optic cables, and apparently his extended service calls hadn't gone unnoticed. "Every system's different," Damon said, but the words felt hollow. "Is it?" Rick leaned forward. "Because I'm getting calls, Damon. Questions about why our techs are spending entire evenings at client homes. Questions that make the company look unprofessional. The weight of Maya's tuition, their mother's medical bills, his own carefully constructed stability, all of it pressed down on Damon's shoulders like atmospheric pressure before a storm. "Who's calling? Does it matter?" Rick's expression carried disappointment that cut deeper than anger. "You're one of my best techs. Don't make me question that judgment." Damon thought about Sophia's laugh over dinner, the way she'd looked at him like he was worth risking everything for. Then he thought about Maya's textbooks, about the apartment lease that came due in 3 weeks, about the precarious balance that kept his world from collapsing. "It won't happen again," he heard himself say. Rick nodded, but his eyes remained skeptical. "See that it doesn't." As Damon left the office, his phone buzzed with another text from Sophia. "Dinner tonight? I'll cook." His finger hovered over the reply button, caught between desire and disaster. Saturday night at Mistral felt like stepping into Sophia's world under fluorescent examination lights. Damon adjusted his tie, the expensive one Sophia had insisted on buying him, and tried to ignore the way conversations paused as they followed the hostess through the dining room. Crystal chandeliers cast everything in golden light, but the warmth couldn't penetrate the chill of curious stares. "There she is." Sophia squeezed his hand as a blonde woman in pearls rose from a corner table, her smile bright enough to power the restaurant, but somehow missing her eyes entirely. "Jennifer, this is Damon," Sophia said as they approached. "Damon, my oldest friend Jennifer Mackenzie." Jennifer's handshake was brief, professional, the kind that acknowledged necessity without enthusiasm. "So nice to meet you," she said, her gaze taking inventory, his shoes, his watch, the careful way he held himself. "Sophia's told me so much about you," The lie was polite, flawless, and completely transparent. Damon settled into his chair, hyper-aware of the couple at the neighboring table, whose whispered conversation included the words, "interesting choice," and "wonder what her parents think." "Damon's the one who finally fixed my impossible network." "Situation," Sophia said, her voice carrying defensive pride that made his chest tighten. "Turned out I needed someone who actually knew what they were doing." "How wonderful," Jennifer replied, cutting her salmon with surgical precision. "And what do you do when you're not rescuing Sophia from technology disasters?" The question landed like a probe seeking weakness. Damon took a sip of wine, $60 a glass, more than he usually spent on groceries, and met her gaze directly. "I run IT support for small businesses and residential clients, mostly network security and system optimization." "Fascinating." Jennifer's tone suggested it was anything but. Sophia always was drawn to unique people. Sophia's fork clattered against her plate. "Jen, what? I think it's wonderful that you're expanding your social circle." Jennifer's smile could have cut glass. "Though I have to ask, Damon, do you know about Sophia's family situation, the expectations?" Heat crawled up Damon's neck as other diners turned to watch their table like a dinner theater performance. Sophia's hand found his under the table, fingers intertwining with protective desperation. "I know enough," Damon said quietly. Jennifer nodded, satisfied she'd made her point. "Just want to make sure everyone understands the landscape. Sophia's happiness matters to all of us who care about her." The implication hung in the air like smoke, that caring about Sophia meant understanding she belonged somewhere Damon couldn't follow. When they left the restaurant, Sophia was unusually quiet, her hand tight in his as they walked toward his car. "Jen means well," she said finally. Damon didn't respond, but they both knew that wasn't really the problem. The phone's shrill ring cut through the intimate quiet of Sophia's living room like an alarm system detecting intrusion. Damon's lips were against her neck, her fingers tangled in his hair. The dinner they'd abandoned cooling on plates, forgotten in favor of something infinitely more compelling. They'd been trying to forget Jennifer's pointed questions, the stares at the restaurant, the growing sense that their worlds were colliding rather than connecting. "Ignore it," Sophia whispered, pulling him closer on the leather couch where they'd gravitated after wine, and conversation had dissolved into touches that promised everything. But the caller was persistent. The phone rang again. Then again, each interruption more insistent than the last. "I should check," Sophia said reluctantly, reaching for her phone. The color drained from her face when she saw the caller ID. "It's my mother." Damon sat back, giving her space as she answered with the careful tone of someone preparing for battle. "Hi, Mum." Sophia's free hand found his, holding on like an anchor. "No, I'm not alone. I'm with a friend." Even from across the couch, Damon could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by rapid-fire questions in a voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "His name is Damon," Sophia said, her jaw tightening. "He's in IT, Mom, please." More questions, each one apparently more invasive than the last. Sophia's grip on his hand grew tighter, and Damon watched her retreat into the defensive posture he'd seen her use with Jennifer. "No, he's not from Greenwich. No, he didn't go to Yale." Sophia's voice carried strained patience. "Mother, I'm 32 years old. I think I can choose my own." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, each exchange chipping away at the intimacy they'd built. Sophia responded to pointed questions about Damon's background, his family, his prospects, with increasingly clipped answers that revealed more than they concealed. "Because I like him," Sophia finally said, her voice rising. "Because he's intelligent and kind and treats me like a person instead of a portfolio investment." When she finally hung up, Silence settled between them like fog. Sophia stared at her phone as if it had betrayed her, and Damon felt the weight of every assumption her mother had made about him, sight unseen. "She wants to meet you," Sophia said quietly. "She's flying up from New York next weekend." Damon's stomach dropped. "To evaluate me, to understand what I think I'm doing." Sophia turned to face him, eyes bright with unshed tears. She mentioned Bradley twice, my ex-fiancé, the one who checked all the right boxes. The name hung between them like a ghost neither had invited to the party. Sunday afternoon found Damon pacing his small apartment like a caged animal, his phone silent on the kitchen counter where he'd deliberately placed it out of reach. 3 missed calls from Sophia, each one a question he wasn't ready to answer. Maya looked up from her biochemistry textbook, watching him wear a path in the already threadbare carpet. "You're going to pace a hole through the floor," she said, setting down her highlighter. "And you've been avoiding that phone like it's radioactive." Damon stopped by the window, staring out at the Roxbury Street, where kids played basketball on a court with one working hoop. His world, familiar and safe in its limitations. "Her mother wants to meet me. And that's bad because she's going to take one look at me and know exactly what I am." Damon turned to face his sister, seeing the sharp intelligence in her eyes that would carry her far beyond this apartment. A guy who fixes computers for rich people and thinks he can date one of them. Maya closed her textbook with deliberate patience. "What you are is someone who built a business from nothing, who's putting me through college while taking care of Mom. Someone who's smart enough to solve problems other people can't figure out." That's not how her world sees it. Screw her world. Maya's voice carried the fierce loyalty that had sustained them through their father's death and their mother's struggles. What does Sophia see? Damon thought about Sophia's laugh over dinner, the way she looked at him like he was the solution to a problem she'd been trying to solve her whole life. Then he thought about Jennifer's calculating smile, about the whispers at the restaurant, about her mother's voice on the phone, cataloguing his inadequacies. "She sees what she wants to see," he said, "but reality has a way of correcting vision problems." Maya stood, crossing to where he stood by the window. At 21, she had their mother's fierce protectiveness and their father's stubborn optimism, a combination that had kept her believing in impossible things, like full scholarships and futures that stretched beyond zip codes. "You know what your problem is," she said. "You think being worthy is something other people get to decide for you, isn't it? Only if you let it be." Maya's hand found his shoulder. "Damon, I've watched you sacrifice everything for our family. Don't you think you deserve something just for yourself? Something that makes you happy?" What if it costs too much? What if it doesn't? Maya's eyes held the same challenge that had driven her to achieve things everyone said were impossible. What if the only thing standing between you and happiness is your own fear? Damon's phone buzzed on the counter. Another text from Sophia, probably asking why he'd disappeared just when things got complicated. "Answer the phone," Maya said softly. "Stop running from the best thing that's happened to you." Damon stood in the marble lobby of Whitman Sterling and Associates at 8:30 Tuesday evening, holding takeout from Sophia's favorite Thai restaurant and feeling like he'd crossed into enemy territory. The law firm's 32nd floor commanded Boston's skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, all polished mahogany and leather-bound authority that whispered old money and older power. Maya's words had echoed in his head for 2 days, until he'd finally called Sophia back, until he'd decided that running from happiness was a luxury he couldn't afford. Now, watching partners in $1,000 suits eye him with barely concealed curiosity, he wondered if courage and stupidity were the same thing. "Can I help you?" The receptionist's tone suggested she'd already decided he didn't belong. I'm here to see Sophia Whitmore, Damon said, adjusting his grip on the takeout bags. She's working late. Before the receptionist could respond, voices carried from the conference room, where lights spilled into the darkened hallway. Sophia's voice, sharp with professional authority, followed by deeper male tones that carried disagreement. Merger. Documents need to be revised before the morning meeting, Sophia was saying as Damon approached the glass-walled room. The liability clauses in Section 12 are insufficient. She looked up as he appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from surprise to something that looked like relief mixed with panic. 3 senior partners sat around the conference table, their attention now divided between merger documents and the unexpected visitor, Damon. Sophia stood, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. I wasn't expecting— Sorry to interrupt, Damon said, hyper-aware of the scrutiny from 3 pairs of eyes that had probably never seen takeout containers in this conference room. I brought dinner, figured you might be hungry. The silence stretched like a wire under tension. Richard Sterling, the Sterling on the letterhead, leaned back in his chair with the expression of someone watching an interesting social experiment unfold. Sophia, Sterling said slowly, would you like to introduce your friend? The weight of professional judgment settled over the room like fog. Sophia's career, her partnership track, her carefully constructed reputation, all of it balanced on how she answered that question. Damon watched her face, seeing the calculation behind her eyes, the careful consideration of costs and consequences. This was the moment that would define everything between them, and they both knew it. This is Damon Carter, Sophia said, her voice steady despite the stakes. My boyfriend. The word hung in the air like a declaration of war against expectations, and Damon felt something fundamental shift between them, something that had nothing to do with networking equipment and everything to do with choosing sides. Thursday. Evening at the Roxbury Community Center, Damon was halfway through explaining firewall basics to a room of teenagers when Sophia walked in wearing jeans and a nervousness that made his heart stutter. 12 kids looked up from their donated laptops, following his gaze to the woman who clearly didn't belong in folding chairs and fluorescent lighting, but had shown up anyway. Sorry I'm late, Sophia said, slipping into an empty seat in the back, like she attended community tech workshops every week. Maya, who'd been helping distribute Ethernet cables, shot Damon a look that was equal parts surprise and approval. Damon managed, temporarily forgetting everything he knew about network security. Right, so firewalls, they're like digital bouncers. 16-year-old Marcus, not his co-worker, but a kid from the neighborhood who'd been coming to these workshops for months, raised his hand. Yo, Mr. D, is that your girlfriend? He'd crept up Damon's neck as every teenager in the room turned to stare at Sophia, who handled the attention with the same composure she brought to merger negotiations. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Damon realized this was another moment that would define everything. Yeah, he said, meeting Sophia's eyes across the room. She is. The teenagers erupted in grins and whispered commentary, but underneath their teasing was something warmer, acceptance, curiosity, the kind of community embrace that came from watching someone they respected find happiness. She know anything about computers? Asked Keisha, a 17-year-old who'd been rebuilding her grandmother's desktop. Sophia stood, smoothing her jeans with hands that barely trembled. I know how to crash them spectacularly. That's why I need Damon. The room laughed, and something in the atmosphere shifted. Maya began explaining router configurations, while Sophia listened with genuine interest, asking questions that proved she'd been paying attention to more than just Damon's eyes during their technical conversations. After the workshop, as teenagers packed up their equipment and filtered out into the evening, Mrs. Washington, the center director who'd known Damon since he was Marcus's age, approached them both. It's good to see him happy, she told Sophia directly. This boy's been carrying the world on his shoulders since his daddy died. About time someone helped him remember how to smile. Sophia's hand found Damon's, fingers intertwining with the certainty of someone who'd made her choice. He makes me remember things, too. As they walked to their cars under streetlights that illuminated more than just pavement, Damon understood that they'd crossed another line, this one leading towards something neither had to hide. "Your community center," Sophia said softly. "I'd like to keep coming, if that's okay." It was more than okay. It was everything. 1 year later, Damon stood in Sophia's kitchen, their kitchen now, watching her mother attempt to understand Maya's explanation of protein folding while Sunday dinner simmered on the stove. The scene would have been impossible. To imagine when he'd first walked into this townhouse to fix her Wi-Fi, back when professional boundaries seemed like unbreachable walls rather than suggestions. "So the amino acid sequence determines the three-dimensional structure," Maya was saying, her MIT acceptance letter still pinned to the refrigerator like a trophy. "And that structure determines function." Catherine Whitmore nodded with the careful attention of someone learning to appreciate intelligence that came without the right pedigree. The transformation had been gradual, skepticism giving way to curiosity, then grudging respect, and finally something approaching maternal affection for the young woman who'd become like a sister to her daughter. "Fascinating," Catherine said, and meant it. Sophia never explained it so clearly. "That's because I barely passed organic chemistry," Sophia called from the dining room, where she was setting the table with the casual efficiency of someone who'd learned to cook for people she loved rather than impress them. Damon smiled, remembering the first meal she'd made him, overpriced takeout disguised as culinary effort. Now she moved through the kitchen like she belonged there, creating spaces that felt like home rather than showcases. The silk robe had been replaced by jeans and an apron decorated with cartoon routers that Maya had given her for Christmas, a gift that had made Sophia laugh until she cried. His consulting business had grown beyond his wildest projections, built on referrals from clients who trusted him with more than just their network problems. The community center workshops had evolved into a non-profit program that provided tech training and equipment to underserved kids. 3 of his former students had received full scholarships to engineering programs, including Marcus, who was now studying computer science at Northeastern. Sophia's firm had made her the youngest partner in their history, partly because her pro bono work had attracted positive attention, and partly because she'd stopped caring more about perception than performance. The merger with Damon's non-profit had been her idea, combining legal expertise with technical training to create something neither could have built alone. "Dinner," Sophia announced, carrying a roast that actually smelled edible. As they settled around the table, the same one where they'd shared wine and careful conversation that first evening, Damon caught Sophia's eye across the candlelight. She was wearing the ring he'd given her 6 months ago, a modest solitaire that had made her cry not because of its size, but because of what it represented. Choosing love over expectations, building something real instead of something safe. Catherine had surprised them both by insisting on helping plan the wedding. "If you're going to do this," she'd said, "at least let me make sure the flowers are decent." The statement had been vintage Catherine, practical acceptance wrapped in maternal concern, but her eyes had been soft when she said it. "What are you thinking about?" Sophia asked, reaching for his hand across the table. Damon looked around, at Maya explaining graduate school plans to Catherine, at Sophia's mother actually listening with genuine interest, at the framed photo on the sideboard showing their engagement party at the community center. Mrs. Washington had insisted on hosting, and half of Roxbury had turned out to celebrate with champagne in plastic cups, and joy that needed no expensive packaging. "Just remembering when you called for tech support," he said. "Turns out you didn't have connection issues after all." Sophia's smile held all the earned intimacy of storms weathered and ground held. Best service call I ever made. Through the window, Boston's lights twinkled like a network of possibilities, each connection strengthening the whole.